My brother, Liam, was always the golden child. Not in a malicious way, just effortlessly charming, successful, the kind of guy who could trip and land in a pile of money. Me? I was more of the guy who tripped and landed face first in a puddle. So, when Liam announced his engagement to Isabella, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine and whose family practically owned half of Connecticut, no one was surprised. Least of all me. The wedding was, as expected, a spectacle. A sprawling estate in the Hamptons, a guest list that read like a who's who of the East Coast elite, and enough flowers to make a botanist weep with joy. I'd even managed to snag a decent suit for the occasion. A navy blue number that made me look slightly less like I just rolled out of bed. The invitation had specified, +1 optional. And honestly, I hadn't intended to bring anyone. My dating life was, well, let's just say it was more of a drought than a steady stream. But then, a few weeks before the big day, I ran into Sarah. Sarah was different. I'd met her at a local bookstore. She was browsed the sci-fi section, and we'd bonded over our mutual love for obscure graphic novels. She was smart, funny, and had this infectious laugh that could brighten even my most dismal days. We'd gone out a few times, and things were promising. So, when Liam's wedding rolled around, I figured, why not? It was a chance to actually have someone to talk to besides my well-meaning but perpetually tipsy Aunt Carol. I'd RSVP'd for 2, and Sarah had been genuinely excited about attending. She'd even bought a beautiful emerald green dress that made her eyes sparkle. We arrived at the estate, the sheer opulence almost blinding. Valet parking, champagne flutes being handed out like water, the whole 9 yards. Sarah was suitably impressed, her eyes wide as she took it all in. Finding our assigned table was a bit of a trek. The seating chart looked like a complex mathematical equation. Finally, after navigating through a sea of impeccably dressed guests, we found our names. Liam and Isabella had opted for those little calligraphy cards that looked elegant but were a pain to read. My name was there at table 12. Sarah's wasn't. I frowned, double-checking the list. Nope, just my name. Maybe there was a mistake? I flagged down a passing waiter, a young guy who looked like he was about to faint from the pressure. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "My RSVP was for 2, but my guest isn't on the seating chart." The waiter consulted his tablet, his brow furrowed. "Bradley? Ethan Bradley?" "Yes, table 12, sir. Just one name listed." My stomach did a little flip. This couldn't be right. Just then, my mother, Patricia, glided over, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite enthusiasm. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my car, and her hair was perfectly coiffed. "Ethan, darling, you made it. Where's—" "Oh, just you?" she asked, her eyes scanning the crowd behind me. "Mom, I brought Sarah," I said, gesturing to Sarah, who was standing a few feet away, looking slightly awkward. "But her name isn't on the seating chart." My mother's smile tightened ever so slightly. "Oh, Sarah. Yes, Liam mentioned you might bring someone. How lovely." Her tone suggested it was anything but. "Well, there must be a slight mix-up. Let me see." She grabbed the waiter's tablet and started tapping away, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen. After a moment, she sighed dramatically. "Ah, here it is. Sarah, yes. It seems she's at table 32. Table 32? I looked at the map on the tablet. Table 32 was the kids' table. It was tucked away in a corner, far from the main reception area, surrounded by balloons shaped like cartoon characters. "The kids' table?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Mom, Sarah is an adult. She's my guest." My mother gave me that patented look, the one that said, "Don't make a scene, Ethan." "Darling." There was a last-minute change in the seating arrangements. We had a few extra children RSVP, you know how it is. It's just for dinner. She can join us later for dancing. "Just for dinner?" I scoffed. "She's going to be sitting with a bunch of 10-year-olds while we're eating filet mignon?" Sarah, bless her heart, tried to diffuse the situation. "It's okay, Ethan," she said, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze. "I don't mind." I actually kind of like kids. But I did mind. I minded a lot. This felt deliberate, a subtle but clear message. Sarah wasn't good enough to sit with the real guests. No, Sarah, I said firmly. This isn't right. I turned back to my mother. Mom, either Sarah sits with me, or I'm not staying for dinner. My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. Ethan, don't be ridiculous. This is your brother's wedding. And Sarah is my guest, I countered. Treating her like this is disrespectful. Aunt Carol, sensing the rising tension, and probably needing a refill on her drink, wobbled over. What's all the commotion, lovebirds? She slurred, her breath smelling faintly of Chardonnay. My mother quickly tried to smooth things over. Oh, Carol, just a minor seating issue. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. I looked at Sarah, whose forced smile didn't quite reach her eyes. This was humiliating for her and, frankly, for me too. Look, Mom, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm going to take Sarah to table 12. If there's an extra seat, great. If not, we'll figure something out. But she's not sitting at the kids' table. Before my mother could protest further, I took Sarah's hand and led her towards table 12. As we walked, I could feel the eyes of a few curious onlookers following us. Great, just what I needed, a family drama before the appetizers even arrived. We reached table 12, which was thankfully a round table with enough space for an extra chair. The other guests at the table, a mix of Liam's college buddies and some distant relatives I barely knew, looked up as we approached. Hey, Ethan, boomed one of Liam's friends, a burly guy named Mark. Who's this? This is Sarah, I said, trying to sound casual. My +1. They all exchanged polite nods, but I could sense the unspoken question in their eyes. Why wasn't she on the seating chart? We managed to squeeze an extra chair in, and Sarah sat down, looking a little flustered but trying to remain cheerful. A waiter came by and took her drink order. So far, so good. Then came the bread rolls. A basket was placed in the center of the table, filled with warm, crusty rolls and a small dish of butter. Everyone reached for one. Except, when Sarah reached for a roll, she found something else on her bread plate. Something small, white, and oddly shaped. She picked it up, her eyebrows furrowing in confusion. It was a fortune cookie. A fortune cookie? At a wedding with a 5-figure catering bill. This had to be some kind of joke. I leaned closer, trying to see what was written on the slip of paper inside. Sarah carefully unfolded it and read it aloud, her voice a little shaky. It says, "Enjoy your meal." That was it? Just enjoy your meal? It seemed anticlimactic and strangely out of place. But then I noticed something else. The fortune cookie wasn't the typical golden brown color. It was stark white, almost translucent, and it felt lighter. Sarah turned it over in her hand, a puzzled expression on her face. "This is weird," she muttered. "It feels hollow." Curiosity piqued. She gently tried to crack it open. Instead of snapping, it crumbled slightly, revealing a small opening. And that's when we saw it. Inside the fortune cookie, nestled amongst the broken pieces, was something that made our blood run cold. Something that made the awkward seating arrangement and the cheap fortune cookie suddenly make a horrifying kind of sense. On Sarah's plate, inside the white, hollow fortune cookie, there was a single, perfectly formed, baby tooth. Sarah and I stared at the tiny, pearly white tooth, a wave of nausea washing over me. It was undeniably a baby tooth, the kind a child would lose around the age of 6 or 7. What in God's name was it doing on her plate? Did someone lose a tooth? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the polite chatter of the other guests at the table. I shook my head, my mind racing. This wasn't some random accident. The deliberate seating at the kids' table, the strange, white fortune cookie. It all felt connected. But how? And why Sarah? I glanced around our table. The other guests were engrossed in their own conversations, oblivious to the bizarre discovery we'd made. I quickly reached over and covered the fortune cookie with my napkin, trying to conceal the disturbing contents. Let's just try to stay calm," I murmured to Sarah. Maybe there's a logical explanation for this. Though, frankly, I couldn't think of a single logical explanation that involved a baby tooth appearing on my guest's plate at my brother's ridiculously extravagant wedding. Just then, a waiter approached our table with the main course, perfectly seared filet mignon with truffle-infused mashed potatoes. He placed a plate in front of Sarah, right on top of the napkin concealing the fortune cookie. Sarah's face was pale. She looked like she might be sick. I reached under the table and squeezed her hand, trying to offer some reassurance. "Are you all right, dear?" asked Mrs. Henderson, a distant relative sitting across from us, her voice laced with polite concern. "Yes, fine, thank you," Sarah managed, forcing a weak smile. She barely touched her food, her eyes darting nervously towards the covered plate. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I tried to make polite conversation with the other guests, but my mind was consumed by the image of that tiny tooth. What did it mean? Was it some kind of sick joke? And who would do something like this? My gaze drifted towards my mother and Liam, who were holding court at the head table, laughing and chatting with their guests. They looked the picture of happiness, completely unaware of the unsettling discovery we'd made. As dessert was being served, a towering confection of white chocolate and raspberries, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was going on. "Excuse me," I said to Sarah, standing up. "I'll be right back." I made my way over to my mother, who was in the middle of an animated conversation with Isabella's parents. "Mom, can I talk to you for a moment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She turned to me, her smile faltering slightly. "Ethan, darling, can't it wait? I'm just speaking with the Van Derlens." "It's kind of important," I pressed. She sighed dramatically. All right, just a moment, Arthur, Eleanor." She stepped away from the table, her eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it, Ethan?" "Sarah, her seating arrangement," I began, trying to sound casual. It was a bit odd, putting her at the kids' table. My mother's expression hardened. "Ethan, we went over this. There was a slight oversight. It's not the end of the world." "But then," I continued, my voice dropping, "when she sat down, there was a fortune cookie on her plate, a white one, and inside—" I hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "There was a baby tooth." My mother's eyes widened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something, fear, in her expression, but it was quickly replaced by her usual composed facade. "A baby tooth?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Ethan, are you feeling all right? Perhaps you've had too much champagne." "Mom, I'm serious," I insisted. Sarah found a baby tooth inside a fortune cookie on her plate, at the kids' table. "It feels intentional." My mother let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Intentional? Ethan, you're being paranoid. Someone probably just dropped it by mistake. Maybe one of the children lost a tooth earlier." "But it was inside a sealed fortune cookie," I pointed out. A very strange, white fortune cookie that looked nothing like the others. My mother's composure seemed to crack just a tiny bit. She glanced nervously towards Liam, who was now looking our way, a questioning expression on his face. "Look, Ethan," she said quickly, lowering her voice. "I don't know anything about a fortune cookie or a baby tooth. But please, for Liam's sake, don't make a scene. It's his wedding day." "So, you're saying I should just ignore the fact that my guest was deliberately seated at the kids' table and then found a human tooth on her plate?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "I'm saying you should focus on celebrating your brother's happiness," she retorted, her tone sharp. "Whatever happened was probably just a silly mistake. Now, please, go back to your table." I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere with her. She was either genuinely clueless, which I highly doubted, or she was actively trying to cover something up. I decided to try a different approach. I made my way over to Liam, who had excused himself from his conversation and was waiting for me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Everything all right, buddy?" he asked. "Liam, can I talk to you privately for a second?" I said. He nodded and led me to a quieter corner of the reception hall, near a set of ornate French doors leading out to the gardens. "What's up?" he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and mild annoyance. It's about Sarah, I began. Her seating assignment? Was that your doing? Liam looked surprised. No, of course not. Mom handled the seating chart. Why? Was there an issue? She was put at the kids' table, I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. Liam's eyes widened. What? That's ridiculous. I specifically told Mom to make sure your guest was seated with you. Well, she wasn't, I said. And that's not even the weirdest part. I hesitated, then decided to just come out with it. When Sarah sat down, there was a fortune cookie on her plate. A white one. And inside, there was a baby tooth. Liam stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. A baby tooth? You're kidding me, right? I shook my head. I wish I were. Sarah has it. It's definitely a human baby tooth. Liam's expression shifted from disbelief to concern. That's incredibly strange. I have no idea what's going on. Let me talk to Mom. He started to walk away, but I stopped him. Liam, I don't think Mom is going to tell us the truth. She acted like I was crazy for even bringing it up. Liam looked thoughtful for a moment. Okay, look, I'm just as confused as you are. But today is my wedding day. Can we please just try to enjoy the rest of the reception? And we can figure this out later? I sighed. I knew he had a point. He was getting married, and I didn't want to ruin his day with some bizarre mystery. All right, I conceded. But I'm not letting this go. We rejoined the reception, and I tried my best to act normal, chatting with Sarah and even attempting a few awkward dance moves when the band started playing. But the image of that tiny tooth kept flashing in my mind. As the evening drew to a close and the guests started to depart, Liam and Isabella made their rounds, thanking everyone for coming. When they reached our table, Liam pulled me aside. Look, about earlier, he said, his voice low. I'm really sorry about the seating thing. I'll talk to Mom about it later. And the tooth thing, that's just, I don't even know. It's okay, Liam, I said, trying to sound understanding. Just keep it in mind, okay? Something weird is going on. After Liam and Isabella moved on, Sarah and I gathered our things. As she picked up her clutch, she subtly slipped the napkin-covered fortune cookie into her bag. We're going to figure this out, right? She asked me, her eyes filled with determination. Absolutely, I said, taking her hand. Come on, let's get out of here. We walked out of the opulent reception hall and into the cool night air. As we waited for the valet to bring our car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the baby tooth was more than just a random, unsettling discovery. Felt like a message. A warning, perhaps. The next morning, Sarah and I were sitting at my kitchen table, the white fortune cookie carefully placed between us. We'd both had a restless night, the image of the tooth haunting our dreams. So, Sarah said, breaking the silence, what do we do now? I shrugged. I have no idea. I could try asking Mom again, but I doubt she'll tell me anything. Maybe we should try to figure out whose tooth it is, Sarah suggested. I mean, it has to belong to someone, right? But how would we even begin to do that? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Sarah picked up the fortune cookie and examined it closely. It looks pretty old, she said, turning it over in her fingers. And it's so white, almost bleached. Suddenly, a thought struck me. Something my mother had mentioned years ago. A story she'd told me about Liam when he was a child. Wait a minute, I said slowly, my eyes widening. When Liam was about 6 or 7, he had this really stubborn baby tooth that wouldn't come out. Mom took him to the dentist, and they had to pull it. Sarah looked at me, her expression mirroring my own dawning realization. And what did your mother do with the tooth? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I swallowed hard, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. My mother had always been sentimental. She kept everything. Liam's first drawing, his report cards, even his old baby clothes. She probably kept it, I said, a knot forming in my stomach. She has a whole box of that kind of stuff in the attic. A chilling thought crossed my mind. Could this have something to do with Liam? Was this some kind of twisted prank orchestrated by my mother? But why involve Sarah? And why the kids' table? Just then, my phone rang. It was Liam. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice sounding strained. "Can you come over? There's something I need to show you." "What is it?" I asked, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Just come over," he repeated. "And bring Sarah." Sarah and I exchanged a nervous glance. Whatever Liam wanted to show us, it couldn't be good. We grabbed the fortune cookie and headed over to his apartment, the mystery of the baby tooth hanging heavy in the air. When we arrived, Liam was waiting for us, his face pale and drawn. He led us into his living room, where Isabella was sitting on the sofa, looking equally distressed. On the coffee table in front of them was a small, antique wooden box. Liam slowly opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were several small white envelopes. He picked one up and handed it to me. My name was written on the front in my mother's familiar handwriting. "Mom dropped these off this morning," Liam said, his voice trembling slightly. "She said they were wedding favors." I looked at Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. Wedding favors? What could possibly be inside these envelopes? I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the contents. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper. My hands shaking, I unfolded it and began to read. The handwriting was undeniably my mother's. The words, however, were something I could never have prepared myself for. "Dear Ethan," the note began, "I wanted you to have something special to remember Liam's wedding by. Something that shows how much our family means to me. I've kept these for a long time, waiting for the right moment. I hope you cherish them as much as I do." Below the note were two small, white objects. I tilted the paper, and my breath caught in my throat. Lying there, next to my mother's saccharine note, were two more perfectly formed baby teeth.